Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing fine.
Good.
Just working on the problems that we have, trying to get out information. That's the only thing I can offer.
That's right.
And they can take it or leave it, and if it's worth anything, maybe somebody will take our advice or our concerns or our approach to what government should be doing. But of course, the big news still is coronavirus. The people are terrified of it, and it's going to continue. But there's still wars to be fought, and we want to talk a little bit today about the conflict of this. They're fighting two wars at one time, and both are pretty out of control. And that has to do with, right now, Trump is trying to soften the aggressiveness of those who say the world's coming to an end within 3 weeks, because of coronavirus. And there's too many unknowns yet, and the stuff that I find out that tend to believe is a much more moderate approach to the crisis, the health crisis. I think it's way out of proportion to the danger. That, once again, that's not to say that people shouldn't be concerned, especially people who have been compromised on their immune system. Yeah. So there is a problem there. But I think Trump, at the beginning, he was really hit hard because he was saying, well, maybe it won't be so bad. And he'd use terms that, influenza can be very bad and people die from it. And he got a lot of grief, a lot of heat. So then he had to back down and started announcing these emergency procedures. But he's at it again because I think the instincts are coming back, and it's challenging the status quo and the conventional wisdom and the neocons. And he's saying, this isn't quite this bad, and we ought to think it's not American to keep these kind of controls on, locking up people and creating more havoc and making things much worse and causing financial crises. So he's saying let's back off, within the next few weeks. Maybe we can stop this. And today, I think there was some people believing it, and that contributed to the stock market going up, in combination, of course, with the promise of all kinds of bailouts and spending, congressional spending, plus the Federal Reserve. And it's not a couple $1 billion here and there. It's not a couple $100 billion here. It's into the trillions. I can't even keep up with the trillions. But even in the bailouts in 08 and 09, the trillions were hard to keep track of. But right now, of course, on the table, and Pelosi's very much involved, the Republicans proposed something at one time between $1.5 and $2 trillion, and she held it up. No way. We need the greenies have to be taken care of on all the social stuff. She went, we're not going along with it, so they had to go back. We want $2.5 trillion. And that sounds like a lot of money. But if you put that together with the artificial credit, the nonsense the Fed does, many trillions of dollars, and start injecting it, try to rescue the mess that they created, they being the government, the Federal Reserve, and the Congress spending, and all this nonsense that's going on. So this is going to be, I think, right now the big battle is to take care of Trump and get this craziness out of his mind about maybe we can soften up a little bit about this punishment that we're placing on the American people. It was sort of like us arguing, we shouldn't be punishing the American people with TSA because of 9/11. Yeah. But the TSA is still there. And I bet he's starting to realize that if this isn't, taken under control, that it's going to get worse and last for a long time. So those instincts that we sense are the kind of thing that we want to encourage, because most of that I personally wouldn't have ever endorsed. I would have allowed. I would have permitted and legalized common sense. And there are some physicians who practice common sense a lot differently than the medical advice that Trump's been getting.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Trump does have good political instincts, and I think he's seeing something that's happening here. We had Russiagate 1.0, 2.0, this desperate attempt to get him out of office. I don't think there's any doubt in his mind that there are people out there, particularly from the party that produced someone like Rahm Emanuel, who will see this as a good crisis they can't let go to waste. This may be the only way that Biden could beat Trump. You're looking at the way Biden is on the campaign trail, is to have a full-on depression, and Biden comes out saying that he's the savior. So I think Trump does recognize this, and we saw some movement yesterday Here's a couple of quotes, Dr. Paul. Makes me wonder maybe if Trump's watching our show, because here's what he said. He said, this is a medical problem. We're not going to let it turn into a long-lasting financial problem. He said, you look at automobile accidents, which are far greater than any numbers we're talking about. That doesn't mean we're going to tell everybody no more driving of cars. And he said, if we're up to the doctors, they may say, let's keep it shut down. Let's shut down the entire world. You can't do that with a country, especially the #1 economy in the world by far. You can't do that. It causes bigger problems than the original. Pretty sound stuff.
A burst of common sense. And I think our numbers and the people, some statistics show that the people in the country now are starting to agree with what he was saying there. And of course, the telltale will be the election. If he can just hang in there and stick with this and move in the direction of more freedom and reducing this total control of our lives. I would hope the American people would be disgusted, but they have to be convinced that everybody's not going to die next year or next month, from this disease, because I just don't believe that is the case. Or they'd be worried about tuberculosis and influenza or automobiles. If they care about lives, this is not about saving lives. This is saving face for the politician. I want to connect this problem that's going on and how we deal with the coronavirus. Here's an anti-war article, and the question in the top of the article is will the virus bring down the American war machine? And there was talk about, the war games that are planned. No, we can't cancel the war games. We got to do it. There's no concern there, but the war game must continue. And at the same time, there are some people that would argue the case, including myself, that the spending in the financial system will bring down the war machine because we won't be able to afford it. But that's sort of a little bit in the distance. But it should be more of a problem. But right now, they believe that it doesn't matter. I mean, the irrational bubble now is total ignoring of the debt. Just like nobody would listen to us and others more professional than me. They said the deficit, the stock market's fine. It's not in a bubble. And I listened to this business station. It was over and over again. The only thing that surprised me a little bit, I have to admit, I always described the economy as sitting there. They say, well, it looks good. I said, it looks good. Looks like we have a neat building and everybody's pleased with it, but I believe the foundation is gone. So I was talking about what I assumed, and then, the foundation wasn't so good, and boom. All I can say is I was surprised it went down so precipitously and so dramatically and so quickly. And that, of course, shows that the foundation of our system has rotted away. And whether we're trying to solve the medical problem of a virus or we're trying to rein in the budget and thinking about a different foreign policy.
And that certainly wasn't something that just happened because of the virus. As you point out, the foundation was wrong. But, they did cancel some. They did cancel some war games. The ones in Europe were canceled. The Europeans weren't too keen on being there with the virus spreading around everywhere. So we pulled out of those. But in another article that we noticed on antiwar.com today, 4,000 U.S. troops in the United Arab Emirates to fight an imaginary war against Iran. Those games had to go on. They built a kind of a model Iranian town to go in and attack. But they said, don't worry, this is only a defensive maneuver to move in. So those war games are continuing. The saber rattling is continuing toward Iran. And in fact, there are people, I think, in the administration that are exploiting this coronavirus. And I'm thinking particularly, look at our title of Mike Pompeo. He's using it, and his people are using it to further punish Iran and Venezuela. And it's extremely unseemly, it's unhumanitarian, it's un-American. Venezuela is battling this virus as well. They went to the IMF, please, we need a $5 billion loan. We're not in great shape. We know that, no surprise. It was blocked. Washington blocked it because they still have this fantasy that Guaido is in charge. So they can't help them with, so people are going to suffer and die. The U.S., and this is Phil Giraldi wrote this in a piece that he has out today, the U.S. declared a maximum pressure march against Venezuela this month. Just as they're on their back suffering. how's the world going to take this kind of behavior?
What if the enemies of our foreign policy get together and say, well, let's cause a little skirmish down there in Venezuela and one in Iran or someplace else?
Yeah.
But the one part of all this, and especially with Pompeo, is this pretense that all that we do over there is for humanitarian reasons. Remember all the humanitarian arguments for going into Iraq. Well, where are they now? 90%? Maybe close to 90. People say it was a dumb war. It made no sense. It was based on lies.
Yeah.
But the whole thing is this mob psychology and reaction. Wish we could curtail it in time to prevent the problems. I mean, the people are going to wake up. I think they're going to, you know, let's say in a month or two, our suspicions that and Trump's suspicion that it can't be quite that bad, and maybe the summer months will change this all. You know, it doesn't change it. And the people who like authoritarianism, you know, they didn't get rid of TSA once the problem settled down and we've killed all the jihadists. But here, we're not going to reverse all this. And all it's going to do is pick and choose who is going to be taken care of. You know, they're going to use a socialistic authoritarian system to divvy up the loot that they don't have, and the loot will be just debasing the currency, printing the money, and picking and choosing winners. There will be no discrete attempt at understanding that the weaker companies under conditions like this, since nobody saved money, you don't save them because it's a temptation to say you save the weakest. No, what you want to do is let the market sort it out. You want the people who have done well and saved and their companies are strong. What we're doing is we're taking from them.
Yeah.
And even if it's just diluting the money they saved and taking care of themselves. But this whole idea, whether it's a humanitarian instinct to go into Iran or a humanitarian instinct now to take care of all the people that are suffering. But if you're doing it with socialistic ideas and collectivism, this thing about the masks, it's crazy. I say, well, we have to do something about it. So the government, I don't know where the order has been completed yet, but we have to manufacture 65,000 masks. That doesn't seem like a whole lot, you know, to me, because the price has gone up. It's up to $17, and they cost $1 to make. So I would think that socializing this, you know, can you imagine what it's like to say, okay, we're in the business of making masks. We're going to pass out contracts, and we're going to save money. Are they going to get the best price? No, it's like building bombers, you know, F-35s. Bombers, we always get the highest prices. And so they shouldn't be in this trouble, but it's the capitulation on this where the socialists are probably feeling pretty good. The Marxists that are crept into our Congress and into our university, they're probably gleeful right now because on the short run, they don't look at people suffering from the consequences. They do. They recognize, yes, there are consequences, but that's a price you have to pay, you know. So they try to ignore that. But eventually, though, the American people are going to wake up, and I hope our president continues to make the point that this should not be permanent. Probably gone too far now, and let's encourage him to back away, and let's hope and pray that the sunshine comes out real soon.
You know, it's not a long commute from my house over to the studio. In fact, we're in the same neighborhood. But I always pay close attention when I'm driving to the studio and looking at the small businesses on the way. And I noticed there are several restaurants I've noticed over the months, you know, small independent mom and pop restaurants. You know, slowly they'll put up a sign, you know, a marquee sign, slowly building up their business a little bit by a little bit. And it's so heartbreaking to drive by now and see it completely empty. You know that they didn't have a lot of margins, and knowing what they're suffering and all the people that work there are suffering, it just seems insane to punish the healthy because there might be a few sick people who, you're right, they should take care. People who are vulnerable should take care. But why shouldn't the healthy? Why should these people be punished just trying to build a little business.
That reminds me of a story this happened a couple of years ago. You probably are familiar with it. A local restaurant burned down.
Yeah.
Very, very popular. And he was a good businessman. He was in business within days. He found another building. He opened it up. He was in business. He had to tear down his building and rebuild it. His credit was good. His savings were good. He had a good idea. But the government really wasn't involved. He didn't have to wait for an SBA loan to come in and tell him what to do. And that was one thing that we complained a lot, and a lot of good economists has mentioned, is that prior to the crash and the crumbling of our foundation, the complaint was, nobody saves any money. Yeah. You know, there was a statistic, 40 or 50% of the people didn't have enough money to take care of themselves for a month.
Yeah.
So what are they going to do? I mean, the politicians, we have to take care of them. And it is a tragic situation because the philosophy plus the encouragement of people to borrow, you know, got them into this mess. And how do you wave a wand and cancel out all those mistakes? And unfortunately, the medicine is pretty tough, but it does require a basic understanding of economics, that you can't take an economic system that's based on deficits, inflationism, regulations, war, and all these things and think you can patch it up. That's what the Fed's been doing for a long time, and that is why there have been many, and the Austrian economists, especially in the past 10 years, and said that greatest recession is not fixed. You're not fixing it, and now we will be facing a great depression. And I think we really are, since so far we haven't heard the determination of the American people say, I want my freedom back, and I'll take care of myself. Just leave me alone. Just get rid of my taxes. Get rid of these regulations, and let us take care of ourselves, because you're incapable of taking care of us.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, the second part of our title, we're picking on Pompeo again, but it's because he's a monster. I mean, there's no other way of putting it. You know, the New York Times ran a great piece about a debate that happened in the White House last Thursday. There was a strong debate between two factions in the White House on whether they should take advantage of Iran being on its back, on its heels because of this virus, to strike out and escalate militarily. On one side, you had Pompeo and Trump's national security advisor O'Brien. They argued, now's the time to strike. Let's hit them now. Let's hit them hard. On the other side, you had Esper, the Secretary of Defense, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Milley. They said, we don't have any intel to prove that the Iranians were behind these attacks on the bases in Iraq that the U.S. were occupying. So Trump leaned toward the realists, or the non-warhawk, crazed warhawks, and it chose a limited strike and did not follow Pompeo's advice to, now's the time, now's the time. So let's hope that he's going to start looking and seeing at the kinds of people who he has working for him and what they are doing. I mean, he calls himself a Christian, and he adds more sanctions onto Iran at a time like this.
No, it is a real tragedy, and and to do it when they're down and out, and we, you know, put them in this position, then we come along and want to add more and more. And but that may be breaking. You know, there's some European lack of support for this. You know, ever since we got out of the nuke treaty with Iran.
Yeah.
So there is some sympathies there, but right now, believe it or not, with all the trouble and all the crashing and all the spending, the one link that's holding the empire together is the superiority of the dollar.
Yeah.
And not that it deserves it, but it's also indicating that there are alternative investments, everything from gold and silver and crypto. People are trying to get out of that system, you know. So this is becoming known, but what we have to do is try to prepare people for an alternative. But there was one item in the news this week that I sort of chuckled over, that maybe it's a sign of the coming end of this mess, is we've read about the hoarders.
Yeah.
The herd instinct to all of a sudden say the world has to hoard toilet paper. The toilet paper mania.
Yeah.
So nobody, and this was pervasive, you know, it was over. But I understand, I don't know who runs Costco, and I understand it's a pretty good company, but this one individual, he really got in early. He was a real anticipating. We're going to have shortages of toilet paper. So he went and got a bundle. And I understand he went back, and Costco said, you bought it, you keep it, we're not taking any returns. So maybe that message will get out. Maybe that's the end of the shortage.
Yeah, that would be it. The best thing would be the price to go up. But,
yeah.
This whole thing, just to close out, it's just common sense. While Pompeo is using this crisis, this tragedy, to push more sanctions and more pain on people he hates, China is sending massive aid to the countries that are stricken. They sent 2,300 boxes of masks to Italy. They sent a bunch of aid to Iran. The European Union is providing 20 million euros in aid to Iran right now and sending aid to Venezuela. It's just common sense that you don't behave this way in a crisis. What's it going to look like when this thing is over and you have people like this, these monsters trying to inflict more suffering? It's insane. So I just hope that President Trump, this is a great opportunity to be a leader, cancel the sanctions on Iran. Let's start building a relationship with Iran. This is a great reason, a great starting point to do it, and we will all benefit from such a thing.
Good. He has good instincts there, and he has other good instincts as well about understanding how deadly the coronavirus isn't, So, and he has spoken up. And once again, we reiterate, it's very serious, especially if you have an impaired immune system. And I think we need to concentrate on that because people aren't going to change their mind until they realize that healthy people basically don't get sick from this. This might not even appear. That's why the numbers don't show up, because they can't find anybody, because you have to get real sick. And we've reported here already that more than 50% of the people in Italy, which has been a really bad place for coronavirus death, that over 50% had 3 other diseases. And it boiled down to less than 1%, 0.8% of the people that died had other, that didn't have anything else. So that statistic is important, and but it tells you who really has to protect it. But imprisoning people and not letting them go out of the house and taking them off the beaches because because you might spread it. Well, that's where the virus is killed. I strongly believe in that. I believe that vitamin D is good and vitamin C is good and zinc is good. And we need a lot more people thinking along those terms, because the government can't protect us against ourselves in an economic or social sense. And they can't protect us against ourselves when we do stupid medical things. And if you look at our country has a lot of self-induced medical problems, and the ones who are vulnerable right now are certainly not and a lot of them, most of them aren't self-induced. But understanding it is important, and that is why it really bothers me when somebody slips into the administration, becomes a spokesman for the political and medical notions about what the virus, the coronavirus does, because they have misspoken, they have terrorized the nation, they've overdone it, and I think that there was a little bit of expression of this conflict and misunderstanding. But if you want coronavirus, extremism, you want this, because this gives people like Pelosi and others, well, we can take, a bill of 1.8 trillion and turn it into 2.5 trillion. This is good stuff. So that is what has to be done. But the advice that we get sometimes from our administrators, and that, of course, if I had a gentle little conversation with the president, I would suggest to him, be a little more cautious on the people that you put in your administration to get your advice from. And you have good common sense. Use it more often, because it's so necessary for people to calm down a little bit right now. And I know people will not want to hear that and claim this is completely wrong, because this is a crisis. I think that the crisis that have been brought on by our ridiculous spending and inflation policy that Congress and the Federal Reserve is way underemphasized. That's what we really have to talk about it. That's where the collapse has come from. And I would say that the crisis, so to speak, of what's going on with coronavirus has been way overblown. There should be moderation. The Greeks believed in moderation is best. And we could have a lot more moderation in our speech right now and try to figure out what the truth is, especially in economic matters and the protection of personal liberties, and bring people back to their senses. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.